Hi everyone, welcome to our live event. My name is Brenda K.B. Anderson and I'm a sewing instructor, also knitting and crocheting instructor as well, and I like to dabble in all sorts of crafts. And I am very excited today to show you guys how to make my latest craft project. These are called the structured scrap fabric pods. It is basically a basket made out of just scrap fabric. There isn't any other kind of structure in here. It's just scrap fabric and thread, because one of the things that I love doing is using up scrap fabrics, using the things that I already have, leftover bits of things here and there. So I get very excited about combining those things together and making something really cool that when you look at it, you might not think, oh, I bet you were just trying to use stuff up. You might think something like, wow, that's really cool looking. How did you do that, right? So that was my goal for this project. I wanted to use up a bunch of scraps that I had. I had a bunch of just cotton fabric, quilter cotton, also, just some muslin, some other little scraps. And the fabrics really didn't look very good together. There were some kind of interesting prints that didn't really seem to go together. But the colors looked okay together when I kind of like put them on the table and squinted at them. So I thought, okay, I'm going to figure out a way to combine these fabrics together in a way that is not going to show like the specifics, the prints, so that it's not going to look out of place or distracting. So also I wanted to make something functional, and I am kind of going through things and trying to organize things in my house right now. So making baskets came to mind. So this project, let me just pull these in here. So this project is just made out of long skinny scraps, and we're going to braid them together, and then we're going to stitch them with our sewing machine. We do not have to stitch the scraps into a very, very long piece. I'm going to show you how to incorporate them as we are making the braid. And so that kind of eliminates the step right there, makes it really easy, and makes it easy to combine fabrics together without having to think about it much ahead of time. And this is just basically a free-form project. I'm going to teach you basically how to start it out, how to know about how big your basket's going to be, the different techniques, of course, to make this basket. And you can do things like making some stacking baskets. So these are nesting baskets, if you will. So this is a slightly smaller basket. This one is about, let's see, I think it's a little over 5-6 inches maybe wide or in diameter. Let me see. I actually put the dimensions in your download here. Okay, so it's just a little less than 6 inches in diameter straight across. This one's around just a little over 7 inches across. So you can make them to various different sizes and you can nest them together. Or you can just make it for a specific thing you have to a specific size. So go ahead and download your instructions if you'd like to follow along. You can go ahead and download that now. You can download it later. It doesn't matter. It'll still be there. But this is basically the whole plan. All the directions are all written out. Plus I did a lot of little picture tutorials in here to show you how to do the braid, how to get started. Just because I'm a visual learner and this is the type of handout that I would have wanted for this particular project. So I threw that all together for you guys so you can follow along if you like. But I'm going to be teaching you in this video how to do it from start to finish. All right, so you're going to be needing obviously some scrap fabric. And I did keep track of how much yardage you need for each of the bowls that I made. And this one took about 2/3 of a yard, this smaller bowl, and this larger bowl was closer to, about 1 yard is needed for this size bowl. So just to give you kind of an idea, I mean, the whole point is to use your scraps, so you may not know exactly how much you have, but just to give you some sort of place to start and, so that you know about how many scraps to be collecting before you start this project. All right, so the first thing you're going to do is you're going to cut up your fabric into strips. The strips should be about 1 inch or 1.25 inches wide. They don't have to be perfect. This is something you can eyeball if you feel comfortable with that, or you can, measure it if you aren't comfortable with eyeballing it. That's fine too, but it really does not need to be perfect. So I'm just going to grab my this little chunk of fabric here. And what I do is I tear my fabric just because I feel like it's a lot faster for me, and I don't have a very large table at home so that I can cut things out with a rotary blade. It just seems so much easier to make a little snip and then to tear my fabric. So that's what I'm going to show you how to do. But if there's if there's another method you'd like to use, cut your strips, that's completely fine. You can absolutely do that. So I didn't bother measuring my fabric, but I'm just going to throw this here so you can kind of see. So I will cut a little just a little tiny cut at about 1.25 inches all the way along the end here. So however much I feel like I want to use from this project. Let's see. So that once you get started, you can just kind of eyeball that size and make some little cuts, and then you can just go ahead and rip it all the way across. So I am doing mine cross grain here, this particular piece, but I have done them along the grain as well. I have ripped it in that direction and also cut it in that direction. I have also even used bias strips that I had cut for a different project. I just already had some bias cut strips that were about the right width. That works too. It really doesn't have to be, you don't have to worry about the grain line. I mean, the grain line does help you when you're tearing. If you go vertically or horizontally, you can't really tear something on the bias. But if you already have some bias cut strips, you can certainly use those as well. Okay, so you're gonna just keep ripping all of your strips until you have a pile that looks about like this, or you've used up about 1 yard of fabric or 2/3 of a yard of fabric. And then we're gonna start braiding our pieces together. So, and then if you wanna be using up your color in a way that is kind of sort of planned out or has a little bit of thought, you can think about if you wanna have stripes in your bowl. Like for example, this one's in progress here. You can see that there's that blue stripe. All 3 strands of the braids that you see here, those were all made with the blue. And this is a different fabric right here. This is a different fabric down here. So the entire braid, all 3 strands of the braid, were made with the same fabric that I cut. I just wanted to show you the difference between that and if you're using a bunch of different colors or a bunch of different patterns all braided together. So 3 different fabrics braided it into one, then you get this kind of all over sort of more speckly if you have a print, or it would just be mixing your colors together. So that's just something to think about when you are combining your scraps. You also could just choose to not think about it and just grab whatever comes up. That's completely fine too. So I'm gonna take 3 different fabrics here. And by the way, they don't have to be to any particular length. They can be whatever length, let's grab this one here. Whatever length your fabric is, just rip them or cut them to whatever length that is. It's actually a bonus if they're not the same length as each other, and I'll explain why in just a little bit. Okay, so we're gonna start our braid. We're going to just stack our fabric on top of each other. And then I'm gonna use a safety pin to adhere it to this mat that I have, but you could, when I'm at home, I'll pin it to the knee of my jeans, or I can pin it onto like a pressing ham or something else that's gonna be stable enough that it's not gonna pull. I'm just gonna pin it to the very top of that. And then we're gonna start braiding. So just in case you are not familiar with the 3-strand braid, that's what we're gonna be doing. You just take whatever strand is on the right, and you're gonna place it between these 2. And then you're gonna take whatever strand from the left and place it between these 2. From the right, from the left. Okay, so you're just gonna make your braid in this way. And if you have really long strands, you will have to kind of untangle this as you go. And as you are braiding your pieces together, you can choose if, say you have a print on your fabric, but you don't really like the print, you could fold the print to the inside and just have the lighter side be visible. So if you fold it in half, the lighter side of this piece would be visible. Or you can fold it this way so that the colors are more visible. So you can kind of decide how much you care about that. I don't usually care. I just braid it as it comes, and that's that. Because for me, this project is just using up scraps, and if I don't like how something's looking as I'm creating it, then I can fix something if I want to. But I generally, when I'm using so many thin little straps and combining them together like this, usually I like how it looks. I kind of like those scrappy projects. All right, so once you start running out of one of your strands, and we're about to run out of the yellow one. And actually, I want to mention too, when your braid gets long, like longer than this, or if it starts getting awkward, then you can just unpin that and then pin up a little higher into the braid and then repin that to whatever it is that you have attached it to, just to make it a little bit easier on you. So once you are running out of one of your strands, you're going to add another strand in. So this yellow one here is the one I'm going to add, and just a couple more passes here. That looks like it's about short enough. You want it to be about 2 to 3 inches or so long. And then we're going to pick another piece of fabric. I'm just going to grab this one. And you're going to either put it underneath like this, or you can put it on top, either way. I prefer to put it underneath because usually it makes it a little bit easier to put it underneath, and then you can fold it to the inside and then give it a couple twists like that, and that's going to secure them in place just for now. It's not a very good, it's not super secure, right? If I let go of this, it would just fall, that end would just fall off. But I'm holding on to it up here. See how I'm still holding it as I'm doing my braid? Now I'm pinching it there with that hand. And here we're going to start incorporating that second piece of fabric that's rolled up in there. So after you've, brought it back and forth a couple of times, it's pretty secure. I'll do it one more time, and then I'll tug on it to show you. So that is in there, pretty good. You don't need to pull on it though. I mean, you can give it a little bit of a tug just to make sure, just to show yourself, oh yeah, that's not going to actually come out. And then you just braid it, continue braiding it until that original piece just disappears into your braid. And then you're going to keep doing that until the next strand, until you need to add another strand. Now, if you are braiding this, and let's just say that you cut a bunch of strips and they're all the same length and you run out at the same time, like let's just say all of these strips were about to run out right here, and you notice this. Now, what would happen is if you start doing it all at once, first of all, it's going to be really hard to hang on to. And second of all, it's not going to look very good because it's going to double the thickness of each strand in your braid, and it's going to make a kind of a lumpy spot that might be harder to sew through. So we don't want to do that. We only want to replace one at a time. So keep your eye on that, and as you're braiding, and if it's starting to look like they're all the same length, then just sort of stagger where you would need to add the next colors. So we could say, this could be here, and this one could be down here. Actually, we should probably, I'm just going to back it up a little bit more and make them a little bit. There we go. We'll cut that just a little shorter there, and this one a little longer, and then the blue one will be the longest. Okay, so see how now they're coming in at different lengths. It's great if you have, you have to add one in, and then you have, at least 5, 6, space for 5 or 6, I don't know what you call it, but like basically moving that braid 5 or 6 times, or moving the strands 5 or 6 times before you have to add the next one. That's really the best. But you'll find out as you're working through like what you need to do, like how soon before the end you need to start adding things and how to stagger your pieces. But they should be at least a couple inches different in length. So then we would add the next piece in here. So I'm going to kind of open this up. I'm still holding this little piece. There we go. So I'm just going to open that up. I'm going to place the next color in there. and it should overlap by, about 2 inches or so, and I fold it and then I twist it. And that ends up, being pretty secure as I do the next couple of crossovers here. And that feels pretty secure. And then here's the next one, and we're ready to add another color to that. So we would add that, lay that down, fold it in half, and then give it a little bit of a twist. And then I'm just going to hang on to that until I'm able to incorporate that. So I'm really paying attention to that until we get it braided in just a little bit, and then it really is quite secure, so you don't have to worry. I really wanted to avoid having to use my sewing machine to stitch all of these strips together. So this method I thought was great because you can just add them as you go, and that way you don't have to stitch a whole bunch of legs together and then try to braid that, or braid it a little bit and then sew some more together. That just seemed to be very awkward. All right, so you're just going to continue braiding until your piece measures somewhere around, let's see, 6 yards for a basket like this, or 9 yards for a basket like this. Or if you wanted to do something bigger than that, I just put those 2 measurements in your download just to give you sort of an idea about how much yardage you're going to need. And then you can start actually stitching your basket. So I've got this one all done here. This one's maybe about 9 yards long, 9 yards or so. And I'm gonna cut, this is the end that where I finished doing my braids, or doing my braid. So I'm gonna just go ahead and cut that off like that. And then to start out, we are going to flatten all these pieces onto the table. Okay, so this is something you could just do directly on your sewing machine, but I want to show you here just to make sure that it's very clear. So we're going to stack up these pieces on top of each other. Just like that. So they're nice and flat. And then we are going to use this braid to start stitching the center of the coil for the bottom of the pot. So I'm going to bring this up, and it's still going to be on top of these 3 pieces that are all stacked together. And then I'm going to fold this braid into this sort of U shape. Okay, so it comes up here and back down. Okay, and then we're going to just start stitching this on our sewing machine. We're going to start here, and we're going to do a zigzag that goes between this side of the braid, or this section and this section. It should straddle the place where those 2 braids come together. Okay, so we're going to do a wide zigzag. I would use as wide of a zigzag as you feel comfortable with on your machine. I have a Singer heavy duty, and I'm setting it at almost 5 width-wise, and it only goes up to 6. Okay, so it's pretty wide. I don't want it as absolute wide as it possibly can, just because we're sewing through a thick fabric, and I don't want the needle to go right down next to the foot, because we're sewing through all that thickness, I like to give it a little bit of leeway. So I'm making it just a tiny, tiny bit smaller than it could be, but it's pretty wide, okay, because we're going to be zigzagging from this side to this side, and this side to this side, okay? And we're going to start creating our coil at the bottom of the basket. So I'm going to slide this under our presser foot here. And we want to make sure we're stitching through those 3, that stack of 3 pieces of fabric right there. And get your foot up onto the thickness of those braids put together. And I should mention I just have an all-purpose 1280 needle in here, just universal. But I've used other thicknesses before, and it's been completely fine. So this might be, if you're not using cotton that's a fairly thin cotton like mine, you might have to do a little bit of experimentation and just be careful the first, maybe hand crank your needle through just to make sure that you're not going to have any trouble with it being too thick. with the braid that I've done here, I didn't have any trouble doing that. I didn't need to be using a heavy duty machine, let's just put it that way. It should be just fine, especially if you don't braid it super tight. If you just braid it kind of an average braid, then it should be just fine. But yeah, that, you know, if you're using a different type of fabric, a fabric where it's a tighter weave or something like that, your needle may have a little more trouble going through. So this is something to keep in mind. All right, oh, we've got a hello from Michigan. Hello, thanks for saying hi. Oh, and we've got interesting, eager to see how it's done. Yes, I'm glad you're here. Thanks for saying hi, you guys, I appreciate that. Okay, so yeah, let me know if you guys have any questions about what I'm doing, or you have any other comments or ideas for future live events. I love hearing what you guys are interested in making too. That's always interesting for me to know. All right, so we're gonna do that little zigzag, and as we get to this point down here, I'm gonna start turning this, and I'm gonna be wrapping this coil around, okay? And we're gonna be turning this whole piece like a little pancake. We're just gonna be steering it in that direction because we're gonna start doing a spiral shape. Okay, so here, so we're getting a little closer to the end there. I'm gonna just place the needle in the down position and turn this a little bit here. Just making sure we're going back and forth between those two strands, or those two braids, I should say, or the two sides. And you can see I am just continually, I want this to be touching the edge of that little piece, that braid right there. So we're just snugging it up right next to that. And we're placing it on top of these little 3 ends here. So that not only makes the center of the basket a little bit stronger because there's no hole, you can't, we're zigzagging back and forth, but we're also zigzagging it to something else at the very beginning. That just makes it a little stronger and a little bit easier to feed through your machine as well. And it also basically finishes off that edge. I'll show you what it looks like on the bottom of one of the baskets in a little bit, so you can see where this tail ends up going. All right, so I'm just gonna continue doing that zigzag straddling between those two edges, or the two braids. And basically I'm making a little cookie shape here. I'm just making a little round, thick coil. I get a little ways around, I'm gonna stop and check my work, because at the very beginning of this, when you're working around and around in a circle, it is a little bit trickier because you have to turn your work, you have to turn it as you're stitching pretty quickly, right? Because the circumference is so small. So we're just gonna check and make sure we actually caught both sides. So there's a couple areas right here, there's a little gap. And right here, there's a little gap as well. So I'm gonna put this back onto the machine and stitch it again. And now that it's been sort of adhered to this little piece, it's gonna be a little bit easier for me to stitch. And the more you do this, the less likely you will have to actually go through and fix things. But probably the first couple times you make these baskets, you're gonna end up missing something there. That's just, so just sort of expect that, and it's okay, it's not gonna be perfect, but it's very easy to get back in there. Oops, here. To get back in there and start zigging over where you've already zigged. that feels a little more solid. And I'm just going to continue working around in a circle. And because, let's see, I'm going to actually pull this out real quick just because I want to straighten this out and not have that strand going underneath. I don't want to have to monitor that once I get a little bit further along in my basket. So I'm just going to pull it out, and now I'm going to start right where I left off. So right there. As I'm doing this, I'm making sure that this little cookie shape, this little circle, is staying flat on my machine, flush with the table of the machine. And I am bending this piece around to match up with the edge and just pressing it right next to it and continuing that zigzag. And you can use, I didn't mention this before because it really doesn't matter too much, but you can use whatever color thread you like. Just find something that you think is going to just be a neutral maybe if you have a lot of colors going on, or choose one of the colors and use that thread. Or you can use a contrasting thread if you want to be able to see that zigzag. I'm just using sort of a darker dusty blue because it seems like it blends in pretty well with all these colors. All right, so you're going to continue doing this until your circle is just a little bit smaller than you want the diameter of the entire basket to be. So think of this as like the footprint of your basket. And it will, once you start doing the next step where we're kind of building up those walls or the sides of it, it is going to get just a little bigger, like anywhere from maybe a half inch wider in diameter to maybe even 1.5 inches wider when it's finished. So just keep that in mind. It will get a little tiny bit bigger. But whenever you're ready, and I did mention that I measured in the diameter of this piece across, and it was about 5 inches for the smaller basket, about 7 inches for the larger basket, just to give you an idea on how large, because you need to make a braid that's going to last as you make this basket. So start out with 5 or 7 inches wide, however much braid you have here. You can look at the download and the suggestions on how long the braid is for how large the basket is, if that makes sense. All right, so I think this is a pretty good size here. So if you're happy with the size, then you're going to start, you're going to continue going around and around and adding your braid, but you're going to pick up this at about a 45-degree angle as you're adding your braid to it. And that's going to start making it, giving it that bowl shape. So you just kind of hold it up in the air. I just put 3 fingers below and 1 above as I'm holding this piece, but obviously, you can do it however you feel comfortable. But this should be somehow up in the air because that's what's going to give you that sort of bowl shape. Otherwise, you're just going to make a very large flat disc if you don't pick it up. And if at any point you start to see gaps between your braids, you can always just stop, go back and do a little zigzag to kind of bridge that gap and close up any holes that may be happening. You can also add those later, but I like to stop periodically and check it. I think I see, yep, there's one little gap right over here. I can see the light kind of peeking through. So one way to check for those, I'm just going to pull this out right now because it's very easy just to put it back in and continue where you stopped. But I like to hold my bowl up to the light, up to a window, or if you have light in the ceiling, and then you can see those little gaps a little bit easier. I do have a little gap right here. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to fix that before I continue on. I find that, if you finish the whole bowl and then you realize there's one little gap and it's kind of in the inside, way down into the bowl, it's a little bit less fun to fix those later, okay? So that's why I usually like to fix things as I go. I do a few rounds and then I just look at it and see if there's anything that needs to be fixed before I continue. I'm just gonna keep going actually I'm just gonna sew this a second time. I'm not too far off from where I stopped, so. Pick up that edge to be at that 45-degree angle. It's going to make it easier for you to continue. You can see it's already starting to curl just a little bit along that edge. Just cutting off my threads there from where I patched it. So you're going to continue just sort of holding that edge up and work around and around for at least a few rounds to get it to kind of take that bowl shape. See, now you can see it as actually curling up here. And I'll do maybe another round and then show you what it looks like, and then I'll switch to my next sample. So you can see what the next step is. gonna pull this out just so you guys can see what it is looking like here. So you can see it is cupping, it is turning into that bowl shape. It's getting more rounded. You can also see how stiff this is. It's quite stiff, actually. That's one thing that I really, really love about these bowls is they are actually quite sturdy. So you would just continue doing this until it is about the height that you want the bowl to be, okay? So you're just gonna go round and round and round. And then the last part of the shaping is we're going to be bringing in the top of our bowl so that it makes that sort of pod shape. So it's gonna come in at the top. So as you make these bowls, this is what ends up happening after you do, a few more rounds. It just gets taller and taller, and it sort of starts taking on a little bit more cylindrical shape here, you can see. And that would be perfectly fine. If you like that shape better, then you can just leave it at that. The reason that I designed these to be the shape where they kind of come in a little bit, almost like a nest or like, that pod shape to come in and curve in, is two reasons. One reason, I just think that they look really cute like that. And the second reason is that it makes it stronger. So, if you are gonna put a bunch of things in here that are kind of heavy, if you put them in this bowl, it may kind of do this to collapse the bowl a little, or if it's a shallower bowl like this, and you put some heavy things in there, it might flatten it out, okay? So it might flatten this area out and that area will curl a little bit. So, if you were gonna put something heavy in there like, for example, I filled this up for the photo shoot. I put mandarins in it just to show you that it can hold up and it's not gonna misshape if you put something, not that mandarins are super heavy, but they do have a weight to them when you put a whole bunch in here, right? And it keeps the shape great. When it kind of curves in and comes in like that, it really makes things a lot stronger, and you can put lots of heavy stuff in here and it's not going to allow one of the ends to kind of flop out, because it really can't flop out. It's tight at like a smaller circumference here. So it's also for functional reasons as well. So I want to show you how to make the top of your bowl come in. And like I said before, if you like the bowl wide like this, like there may be certain things that you just really prefer your bowl to look like this, or more of a cylinder shape. You can even go straight up. You could make, like for example, if you wanted to make a cover for like a terracotta pot or something like that, and you just wanted it to come straight up, you didn't want it to come in, that would be great. You could just keep going until it's the height that you want it to be, and then you can finish it off, and I'll show you how to finish it off in just a little bit. But if you do want to make that sort of closed-in pod shape, what you need to do is you're going to continue stitching in that spiral, but you do need to pull on this strand a little bit and make this strand a little tighter than the braid below it, if that makes sense. So as you're stitching it on, you need to be pulling on that strand, and that's what's going to kind of cup the top and pull that in. So let's get this back under our machine here. And once it gets, to be this tall, you can sort of push that in out of the way if it's getting in the way of your machine. So you can, here, I'm gonna try to fold that down so you guys can still see what I'm doing. So normally I would be sewing it like this, or even with this to the outside, but once it gets too tall, it makes it a little bit easier if you just sort of fold that out of the way. Okay, and so now to pull on this a little bit, to stretch this one out and also sort of feed this in, that's what's going to create that sort of pod shape at the top. Okay, so I put my left hand on that side, my right hand is on this braid, and I am going to stretch this about 1/4 of an inch, like that, maybe even a little bit more, and then feed them through together. And I am pushing just a little bit with this to help guide it through. You don't want to push it, you don't want this to go under your foot faster than it should though, because you might jam your machine, you might hurt your needle or something like that. But I am giving this a little bit of gentle pressure to make sure it keeps going underneath, where I am kind of to counteract me stretching this out, if that makes sense. And I kind of Stretch this out, place it next to that, and then hold them together as I stitch. Stretch it out, push this one in, hold them together. Stretch it out, push it in. Stretch this out a little, push that one in. Stretch and push it in. So you'll need to make sure when you are working on this basket that you can at least, you'll have to stop, I should say, stop making that cylinder shape and switch to the method right here where we're pulling on this. You should do that when there is at least 2 rounds left in the braid, if that makes sense. So like if you want to stop and pull it out, make sure the braid can go around your basket 2 times at least. And then you'll have enough to kind of do the last couple of rounds. Just getting rid of those little thread tails from when I just started stitching here. So I'm pulling on this strand. Pretty much every time I get it positioned, I'm pulling on this a little and pushing this up, just pushing forward with my left hand and pulling towards me with my right. Pulling, pushing. Normally I find that I will go around 2 or even 3 times. For the larger bowls, I would go around 3 times probably while I'm doing this last step of the pulling on the braid. So, and it is a little hard to tell what your piece is looking like when, as right now, because it's so tall, I have to kind of keep it squished down here, so you can't really see what's happening yet, but I'm going to pull it out in a second and show you the progress. All right, I'm gonna pull it out so you can see what it looks like. And when you stop, or when you're working on your first one, I would recommend just stopping at some point and looking to see what's actually happening there. And I can see how it's starting to curve in a little here, so that means it's working. I think I need to do that, I would say at least all the way around to here, maybe if not one more round after that. I probably will just keep going until I run out of my braid here, I think. And then I'll show you how to finish it off. But see, you can see how it's creating these separate stripes, the look of these separate stripes, because I used 3 strands of this yellow fabric, 3 strands of the white, pink, and black, 3 strands of the blue when I made those braids. I kept the colors very separate on purpose just so that I could show you the difference that it makes when you combine your pieces together like that. All right, I'm going to place this back in. Look, I can see that there's just a little hole right there, so I'm going to pause and go fix that. So whenever you're fixing a hole, especially when you're coming back in, with that shape, it's always easier to put it under the machine the way that, you had originally stitched it. So in this direction as opposed to this direction, okay? All right, where's that? Here we go. Just gonna go in and fix that little gap. All right, just a little bit more left. I think I might just fasten off somewhere over here. I'm just going to place a little pin in there. I feel like that would be a nice place to stop. Just adjusting that pin that I put in there because I'm worried that it's going to get caught on something. So I just want to push it out of the way. Okay, so here, actually, I'm going to go just a little further because I can see that there's an area where I added a chunk in here. I'm just going to go past that because on my next step, I'm going to show you how to finish this off, and I just don't want, when I cut through my braid, I don't want that part to come apart. All right. So now at this point, actually I'm going to pull this out of here so you guys can see a little bit better. Normally I just do this next step while it's still underneath the machine. There we go. So the next step, I'm going to cut this braid so that it's maybe about 3 inches long here. And then I'm going to unbraid it. And this is basically just a way to end this off and have it look pretty neat and tidy. So now it's unbraided to the point where I had stopped stitching. And we're going to bring these 3 strands to the inside of the basket. Okay, so right through here like this, and we're gonna stitch them down with a zigzag. But we don't want them to all be ending at the same point because that's gonna make a big lump. So I'm gonna cut 1 strand to 1 inch long. Actually, that strand, I wanna do that to the strand that's underneath as well as possible. So I'm gonna cut that one to 1 inch. I'm gonna cut the next one to 2 inches. And then I'm gonna cut the next one to 3 inches or thereabouts. So I can probably just leave it where it's at. And then I'm going to bring these, stack them right up on top of each other. I know this is a little bit hard to tell with the pattern here, but we've got the shorter strand, the medium strand, and the longer strand. And I'm going to fold each one of these in half instead of just letting them be wrinkly. I'm gonna just fold them each in half and stack them on top of each other like this, and then zig on top of the entire thing. Okay, just like this through the thickness of those 3 strands and also through the top of this section right here. And when you do that, it is pretty easy to just lay it down and zig it, but then that does end up stretching out this edge just a little bit. So I end up just sort of pulling on these strands, just as we've been stitching, pulling on that braid. I end up just giving it a little bit of tension as I put it underneath the machine. All right, so I'm bringing that short piece over, and the medium piece, and then the longer piece right on top. I'm gonna place all of that underneath the machine. I'm gonna back up just a little bit here. So I'm stitching right on top of where I already stitched, just for about a 1/2 inch or so, just to kind of get my bearings, get started. And then I'm gonna make sure that I'm stitching on all 3 layers stacked up on top of that very last piece of braid right there. Okay, so 1, 2, and 3. I'm just clipping my threads. I wasn't very good at clipping those when I first joined my yarn here, or began stitching, sorry. All right. So there's the very end of that last little piece, that free end right there. And then I just zigged back and forth to keep it in place. And then we'll take a look how it turned out. Looks pretty good. There's one little section that's kind of sticking out a little bit here, so I'm gonna just push that over and I'm gonna zigzag on top of it one more time. And I'm just not quite happy with how that is flaring out right there. So I'm gonna go ahead and just push that to the inside and then stitch on top of that little spot one more time. All right. That looks pretty good. I'm gonna cut off just a little bit of this here. And then, so you may notice this doesn't look it looks a little bit lumpy, right? Because it's really hard to stitch this just perfectly, right? Nobody's gonna be able to just stitch it absolutely perfectly unless you've made a whole bunch of these baskets. But that's okay. First of all, I mean, you should just pat yourself on the back because you just made something out of scraps that somebody else would have thrown away, and it's something that's beautiful and useful. But also, you can use an iron set on a high steam setting. Let's see if I've got... And this steam will kind of relax the fibers in there, and then you'll be able to shape it with your hands a little better while it's kind of warm and steamy. So I will do that. And then it gives it a little bit of extra sort of stretch when it's been steamed. So you can shape it. I kind of think about this as being like, it's kind of like clay and you're shaping it with your hands. This is the finessing step of this project. And it may help for you. You may find that it's easier to get the shape that you want. If you have a large enough basket, you can use a pressing ham in there to kind of push out the sides. Otherwise, if you have more scraps of fabric, you can pack them inside of your basket to give it, until it's pretty firm in shape. And then that also might help kind of fill it out, make it a little bit more round, make it a little bit easier for you when you're steaming it to get the shape that you want it to have. Let's see. I think I need to heat this up again. There we go. Okay. So let me know. Oh, it looks like I missed your question, Sandra. I'm sorry. How wide are the strips? Okay, so the strips, I cut my strips anywhere from like about 1 inch to about 1.25 inches. I just sort of eyeball it. If you cut them wider than that, it may give you too thick of a braid, and I have not tested that out very well. All right, well, I did make one thing like that and it was fine, but I didn't test it out in this particular fabric. So I don't want to recommend doing anything larger than 1.25 inches unless you do your own test. Just kind of hand cranking it through and making sure that it's not going to be hard on your machine at all. So I keep mine to about 1.25 inches. Even if it gets a little wider, like 1.5 inches, I'm sure that'd be fine. But I aim for 1.25 inches or 1 inch when I do my braid. But of course, you could do thinner strips if you wanted to. And then you would have a thinner wall around your piece. Like if you just wanted to do a little tiny, like maybe like a little bowl for jewelry or something very small, then you might have an easier time if you do thinner braid, and then you can, stitch it up with the same method. All right, so let me see if this is gonna work a little better here. There we go. All right, that looks much better than it did before. You can see the steaming actually does round that out and make it a much more pleasing shape. And then you'll want to just let it cool off completely before you take all your scraps out of there. And then here's my cute little basket. This one's a little bit taller than the other ones. I just wanted to show you like what this one would be like if I did an extra couple of rounds before bringing it in. So you can see the difference there. All right, let me just make sure I answered everyone's questions. Looks like there aren't any more. Oh, I did miss a couple things. How did I miss so many? Oh, I'm so sorry, you guys. That was my mistake. Somehow I missed some stuff in the middle here. Okay, let me back this up. I'm sorry, you guys. Let's see. Oh, I have some kobu in my stash. I like that only 2 or 3 is needed for this pattern. I'm currently knitting my first sweater. Oh, are you talking about my sweater? Yeah, or my top that I made? Looks like, let's see. Oh, somehow I've lost the chat. Let's see if I can get back to it. There we go. Oh yeah, so let me back this up here. Oh my gosh, I missed a bunch somehow, you guys. I'm so sorry about that. Let's see. Oh, someone's going to be making some with scraps of pink, orange, and yellow for summer. Awesome. Oh, and hello to the person who said hello from Kuwait. That's awesome. Somebody's wondering if this is going to stretch over time. Oh, you're talking about, maybe you're talking about the bag, the tote bag. Okay. If you're talking about the granny square bag that I made sort of recently, it should not stretch over time. Let's see. Oh, okay. Sorry, you guys. I think I kind of got into the wrong section of our chat. Okay. Thank you for the compliment on my shirt, you guys. So as you guys were talking about, this was from our last live event where I taught you guys how to make this top. All right. All right, and I think I've gotten all the rest of our questions answered. Yes. Okay, thank you guys so much for being here. I really appreciate it. I appreciate also, your hellos in the chat to let me know that you guys are out there watching. I appreciate that. So if you guys have any further suggestions on things you guys want to learn in the future that you're excited to learn about, then put those in the chat and I'll check those out. I love to hear what you guys are interested in doing. All right, thanks you guys so much. I hope you guys enjoy making these structured pods. Bye.